Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Joining us from, I'm sure, many places around the world. Please share in the chat where you're joining from. This is Belén Gallego, and I am reporting from Madrid today. This is ATA Insights, and we organize these webinars as part of our Relearn program. That, as you know, we look into a lot of the interesting themes, topics, markets that matter to the renewable energy professional around the world. Our aim is hopefully to make information available so that the industry becomes faster, better at doing our job. And, you know, we have a lot of work still to do to make sure that renewable energy is #1 in the world. Today, we're focusing on two really interesting markets, Namibia and Botswana, and we're focusing on the solar opportunities there. And with me today, I have three top experts that are going to share with you what has been happening in this market, what is the status, and what are the opportunities that are opening up. So I'm going to ask each of you to very briefly introduce yourself and also let us know where you're joining from. So Ines, since your microphone is open, so can you tell us a little bit about yourself and where you're joining us from today, please?
Hi everyone, this is Aino Sungajiga. I am the co-founder and CEO for Invest Solar Africa. We are a Botswana energy renewable company, and I'll be touching briefly more on opportunities in Botswana from energy sector. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you very much, Ainos. Next, Ashwin, please, can you let us know where you're joining us from and a little bit about yourself?
Good morning, everyone. The name is Ashwin West. I'm an investment director at African Infrastructure Investment Managers. I'm based in South Africa. Our business is a private equity fund manager. We invest in infrastructure across the continent and have investments in Namibia, renewable energy investments in Namibia, as well as elsewhere on the continent.
Excellent, thank you very much, Ashwin. And last but not least, we've got Isaac here with us today. Isaac, can you introduce yourself briefly and where you're joining from? Thank you.
Yes, for sure. Thank you very much, everyone. My name is Isaac Garcia. I'm the head of project development for Africa and for new countries in Alten Renewable Energy. We are a Spanish-Dutch company that is focused on developing solar PV projects in emerging markets. I'm based in Madrid, but I'm normally working in Kenya, Nigeria, Namibia, in a lot of different countries in Africa.
Excellent. I'd like to go with you, you know, to all of those places. And I'd like to welcome also a lot of people here from South Africa. I can even see yesterday we actually held a session about South Africa. So, you know, there's an integrated resource plan that has just come up. I'm sure that you're familiar with it. And Chris is actually one of the speakers is here as well. So welcome, Chris, and welcome people from NG, from INGT. We have a lot of people presented here, and keep sharing where you're joining from. So without further ado, I don't want to take a lot more time. Let's just plunge into the presentation. So Ashwin, I'd like to ask you, please, to share your screen and get ready, you know, mute your microphone for your presentation. And in the meanwhile, I'd like to, whilst Ashwin gets ready, I'd like to take this opportunity to remind you all that the presentations and the materials will be made available to you. Okay, so don't worry, they will be sent to you. And also that there is a Q&A box at the bottom, and you can feel free to send us the questions. And at the end of the session, we'll take as many as we can possibly take. That's it. I think, Ashwin, you're ready. So let's go for it.
Yep, I'm ready. Okay, so I've already really briefly mentioned or introduced the business that I work for, AIM, but I'll just give you another minute on it. We're an infrastructure fund manager, private equity investor with a focus on the African continent. We currently manage about $2 billion of equity. That equity is spread across 7 infrastructure funds. So starting in 1999, you'll see the very first fund was the Ideas Managed Fund. Up until today, we closed the African Infrastructure Investment Fund number 3 in 2017. It was the first close. So we have, you know, roughly 18 years of investment experience across the continent. We've invested quite heavily in renewables in South Africa as well as elsewhere on the continent. But South Africa has been a big focus for the renewable sector for us. But of course, we have infrastructure investments across the continent. And in terms of presence on the continent, we're based in Cape Town and Johannesburg in South Africa. We have an office in Nairobi. covering East Africa. And then in West Africa, we have an office in Lagos covering the English-speaking components of West Africa, and then an Abidjan office which covers Francophone Africa. So that's really us, and you can always visit our website if you'd like to have more information. If we then look at the Namibian sector, and I'm sure my colleagues will talk more about this, I'm just going to touch on it at a very high level. From the power sector kind of perspective, installed capacity in Namibia is around 480 megawatts, but there's only about 400 megawatts being delivered. Peak demand in 2016 was, however, a lot more, was around 600 megawatts. The source of power is mainly from the large hydropower station, Rokana, and then there's also 30% comes from the local coal-fired power station, Banek. And there's also a little bit of diesel generation, and then of course some small solar PV that's recently been added to the grid through the refit program. But of course, a large proportion of Namibia's power does come from the South African power pool and from Eskom in South Africa. There is, however, an intention to increase the installed capacity to roughly 600 megawatts in the next few years. And there's also a drive to increase rural electrification from 34% to 50%, and that's by 2020. In terms of the regulatory framework within which all of this fits, there are a couple of, I think, key policies, and I haven't pulled out everything, so I've just highlighted some of the key kind of themes. But firstly, there's the Harambee Prosperity Plan, which has an infrastructure pillar and includes targeting increased installed electricity capacity to 600 megawatts, and of course this rural electrification. Then you've got the National Integrated Resource Plan from 2016, and that has made a forecast of around 100 billion Namibian dollars required for infrastructure investment in the power sector in the next 20 years. And of course, they acknowledge the government wouldn't be able to meet that full investment demand. And so they are looking towards the private sector to come and step in through IPPs and assist. Then you've got the National Renewable Energy Policy, and that's really looking to improve access to clean energy, sustainable and affordable energy for all Namibians. And then lastly, the National Independent Power Producer Policy, which I think is still in draft. But that's really looking at classifying IPPs into 3 categories, small, medium, and large, small being less than 5 megawatts. And for the small projects, there's the refit program. And then for the medium and large projects, they're looking towards an auction process. In terms of financing renewables, there's an estimate of roughly $55 million required, Namibian dollars, of course, for the sector in the next 2 to 3 years, so by 2020. As already mentioned, lack of finance has been identified as a barrier to the development of these assets further. And that's really, I think, in 3 kind of areas. One is just a pure lack of capital. The second is related to the high cost of securing capital in country. And then thirdly, particularly with the refit projects, it's related to the cost of structuring project finance for small projects. It's quite a heavy cost for a small 5 megawatt project to carry on a standalone basis. Interestingly, government is, however, looking to support infrastructure development through an infrastructure fund, which is being set up with the Development Bank of Namibia, and that's to finance priority economic infrastructure investments. And this will be in the form of debt and equity facilities. So a portion of that capital is definitely going to go towards the renewable energy sector, and I think that will be very helpful in terms of unlocking some of these opportunities as we move forward. In terms of just a few additional thoughts and items to consider, I mean, Namibia has run a number of renewable energy procurement programs to date. So we've had the small refit programs, 5 megawatts. There've also been a few 10 megawatt projects in the PV space. And then, of course, there's been the more recent 37 megawatt project, which I'm sure Isaac will talk a bit more to. So they have undertaken a number of procurement processes, but I think there has been a little bit of inconsistency between the power purchase agreements. And I think developing some level of consistency would be very helpful in terms of bankability in the market and accessing this additional capital. I think other terms to improve bankability of the PPAs, provision of sale of early electricity, so early operating megawatts, that doesn't seem to be allowed for currently. That would be very helpful, I think, from an equity perspective. Consequences of force majeure and the necessary protections in the event of a force majeure would also be helpful to bring consistency across the PPAs. There's also quite a lot of variability in terms of liquidated damages payable to NamPower in the event of certain instances, be it delays, etc. So I think once again, one needs a bit more consistency and also caps on liabilities for IPPs to make it more attractive. And then lastly, termination provisions and associated termination compensation, I think, has also been a bit variable across the PPAs. So that's just some initial thoughts around Namibia and where we see sort of constraints and opportunities in renewables going forward. If I then move on to Botswana, so here, there's obviously a lot more installed capacity in Botswana of around 930 megawatts. That's the nameplate capacity. However, the effective capacity is far lower. It's around 530, and that's due to underperforming plants as well as some refurbishment work that's happening. Peak demand, similar to Namibia, in fact, is around 600 megawatts. Sources of power in Botswana are mainly from the coal-fired power stations that they have. They also have some emergency diesel generation, and of course, imported power from the South African power pool. There's roughly 0.1% comes from solar PV, and that's really one small plant currently. And then, of course, some small off-grid facilities, but those are quite small. They also have a regulatory framework to try and encourage renewable energy and energy development more generally in the country. Firstly, the National Development Plan has identified, amongst other things, development of a renewable energy strategy and trying to facilitate private investment in the sector. And that would be through a feed-in tariff, as well as biomass projects and a CSP plant. Then you've got the Botswana Energy Regulatory Authority, and that authority is responsible for the regulation of the sector, ensuring sustainability of the energy sector, as well as regulating tariffs, distributing licenses, etc. Then you've got the Electricity Supply Act, which was recently amended to allow for the introduction of IPPs. And then, of course, you've got the Botswana Power Corporation, BPC, that is the state-owned utility responsible for currently generation, transmission, and distribution. And then, of course, from a rural electrification perspective, government is trying to promote rural electrification. There's very, so there's, I've said over 72% of rural communities have access to electricity. So this is a bit of an anomaly, I think, on the continent. It's quite a high level of rural electrification, but they're trying to promote that and increase it further. From a PV development perspective, BPC has commissioned some grid integration studies to look at the best opportunities for integration of PV into the system. They also, of course, have an excellent global level of irradiation. And so, there's great opportunities in country. And of course, comparable to, South Africa, which has now developed a proven track record in the PV space. In terms of a track record in country, though, I think Botswana hasn't necessarily been the best to date. So, in 2015, government ran a procurement process where they looked to secure 100 megawatts of solar for the mining sector. There was significant interest shown, but this process didn't really get very far. Then in 2017, BPC issued another expression of interest for 100 megawatts or 250 megawatt plants, PV as well. Once again, significant interest shown, over 160 submissions were received. But the selection criteria in terms of going from EOI to the next phase, which was request for information, was a bit unclear, and 62 companies or consortia were shortlisted, but many of these had no specific track record in the sector. So it was a bit unclear as to how they'd actually gotten to that point of selecting 62. BPC has now moved forward. They've issued an RFI, and they seem to have shortlisted some companies late 2017, but they haven't taken the next step, which is the RFP. So we're waiting for that to happen. But I think there's been a little bit of inconsistency in their process, and I think what they need to do is actually develop a a better process in terms of moving the whole procurement forward and being a little bit more clear in terms of criteria and selecting the best participants for the sector. Additional items, once again, for consideration. I think the cost reflectiveness of the tariff seems to be a challenge. Currently, the tariffs are just not cost reflective, so their subsidies are required. BPC's financial position is constrained, and that's partly linked to the non-cost reflective tariffs. And then sovereign guarantees. I think given the poor state of BPC at the moment financially, government is going to be required to provide some support to the private sector and commercial banks if they want to encourage participation of IPPs in the sector. And this has hampered, I think, other power projects in the sector in the thermal space. So that's really just a quick snapshot of our views on Botswana and Namibia. And I'll hand over to my other colleagues.
Thank you very much, Ashwin. I would ask you please to take your presentation off so that Ainos can put his on. And Ainos, please feel free to get ready as well. You've been, you just had three or four, I actually think it was three. Can you just take it off, your presentation from the top? Perfect. Just 3 slides, but they were really filled with details. So thank you very much. I think everyone is clear now what's going on. Ainos, everything ready from your side? We've already had some questions, so keep them rolling. Okay, we will try to get to this at the end. Yes, are you ready, Ainos?
Yes, I am ready to proceed. I assume you all see my presentation?
No, we don't yet. Press share screen and pick the document for us.
Okay.
So far there are some questions rolling in. Some of them are very specific, but people are asking about the second round of the refit program, so we'll get to that. Okay, so can you make that into a large screen, please, Ainos? Now we can see your presentation.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay.
We can still just, oh, perfect. Now it's perfect. Okay, so go ahead.
Okay, so just briefly about Invest Solar Africa. So we are relatively a new company. We started operating in Botswana about 3 years ago in 2016. Our business model is just primarily focusing on solar. Currently, we are developing grid projects on the Zimbabwe side. In Botswana, we are focusing mainly on off-grid solutions, serving schools, hospitals, clinics, and some selected mining companies. And as of last year, we converted into a public company and approval to list on the Botswana Stock Exchange. Pre-listing has been granted. So we are on path to move towards an IPO status. But the main mandate for Invest Solar Africa is going to be Botswana, Zimbabwe, and potentially jumping into Namibia and Zambia as well, essentially countries within the Southern Africa power pool. Now, to put things into context, the reason why we like Botswana is I think it's a country which is open for business. Its location, which is more like at the center of Southern Africa, I think it presents some unique opportunities. The country has got sustained economic growth. It has been growing on average almost 5% for the past decade, and I think it will continue to be on the positive growth trajectory. The gross domestic product is also quite high. I think in PPP terms, it's over $40 billion. And most of it, about 24%, comes from the mining sector, primarily diamonds. These, some of the heavy users of electricity, and certainly there's an opportunity to serve that cluster from a renewable energy perspective. Botswana also has got the lowest corruption index in Africa. So even easiness of doing business, I think it's generally better compared to some of the countries in the region. One of the most important aspects that we see in Botswana is the capital markets. Botswana, I think, has got a third in terms of pension funds, in terms of asset under management from public pension funds perspective, irrespective of population, which is slightly lower in comparison with other markets, and of course the triple, the investment grade rating, it's A-rated, which subject to education. To the pension fund managers in terms of investing in renewable energy, I think Botswana presents a huge upside potential for the region. But now to go into specific opportunities that we have in Botswana, I will touch base on in-country opportunities and also potentially the regional opportunity as well that Botswana, I think, can be positioned to serve. As the previous presenter, alluded to, Botswana Power Corporation has got some monopoly, and as we know, based on experience on the Zimbabwe side, the utility companies, ETDC, on the Zambia side, ZESCO, normally there have been a lot of inefficiencies in terms of developing new plants. Essentially, most of the power plants that we have in this region, they were built way back, 1980s. So what most of these power utilities companies were doing was largely maintenance, which is contrary to what we have been, witnessing on the economic front. We have seen a lot of activities, the road network, the railway system coming on board, companies growing, hotels, hospitality. All these components, they demand energy. And now that's why we have a bit of crisis in terms of energy sector. So what we have now in Botswana, there is Botswana Energy Regulatory Authority, which is in the process of actually being more like activated to be more useful, to focus primarily on developing the independent power producer model, so that the private sector can also play. In terms of electrification rates, again, it's generally low, and the policymakers, they are pushing towards, close to 90% in the next 10 years in terms of electrification, recognizing that you need power for the country to have an inclusive economic growth, which doesn't rely on the major, capital cities. Another point is for the local production or the total supplies that we have in Botswana, they are almost 100% is coal-powered power plants. There is no notable renewable energy project. But from our study and understanding is the only renewable energy opportunity which is there in Botswana is solar. There's potential for that. We don't have feasibility study in terms of some other sources of energy like hydro or geothermal. I think those ones, they don't literally exist. Now, if we look for 2018, again showing where the sources of energy are coming from and the forecast which was done by Botswana Power Corporation for the next 10 years, you realize that there is still an opportunity to replace the diesel emergency plant, which is expensive. Again, diesel is coming into the country duty-free, and it's not sustainable. So immediately there's 160 megawatt in terms of opportunity there. Again, Botswana is importing about 150 megawatt via the Southern Africa Power Pool, but the actual source agreement is with Eskom in South Africa. Again, taking these two components into consideration, it means there is an opportunity for almost 300 megawatt there immediately that's needed. if you look for the 100 megawatt with storage that is coming in 2019 or projected to come in 2019, that's the one which, the tender which the previous presenter was talking about. My background being in infrastructure projects in this region, literally for most of the time, I can tell you that it will be difficult for Botswana Power Corporation to implement the project. Hence, we are emphasizing, the government and the policymakers to quickly have an independent power producer model in place, which they are working, by the way. They've been consulting in Zimbabwe, they've been consulting in South Africa, and I think the framework in terms of independent power producer should be on the market by end of next year. So on its own, within Botswana, intra-Botswana, there is tremendous opportunities for independent power producers to come on board. Going forward, the projections, in the next 20 years, the thing is going to, go to almost over 1,500 megawatt. But our projections, we think maybe it will be around 1,200 megawatt. But in any case, it shows that there's still tremendous opportunities. Now, where we see the bigger picture for Botswana is the Southern Africa Power Pool. There is a lot of integration amongst the countries, 13 member countries of the SAPP, Botswana being part of it, Zimbabwe, Namibia, South Africa, and so forth. The grid interconnection is there. They're actually even improving it to facilitate wheeling of power or sharing of power or trading of power amongst the member countries. And most importantly, there is another biggest interconnector, which is called Sizabona, because it covers Zimbabwe, Zambia, Namibia, and Botswana. So it will be a big line that will cover all these territories. I think some of the funding for that line are already in place, and it's at an advanced stage in terms of implementation planning. All these will present opportunity for integration, where somebody doesn't need to build a power in Zimbabwe to save Namibia, or to build the power in Botswana to save Zimbabwe or Zambia. It will be now a matter of choice on where one can think to position the power plant. So my answer to that is, I think Botswana is positioned to do that, irrespective of the fundamental economics and stabilities of policies aspects that I mentioned in the first slide. We see a situation whereby South Africa is sort of losing grip in terms of economic direction, and also, given the issue, the state capture, crisis going on, the aspect of land reform that are coming in, the rand currency, I think there's a lot of uncertainty around it. And we think Botswana is positioned to be the power center from that perspective, where one can even build a solar park in Botswana, be it concentrated solar park or otherwise, then sell the power via Southern African Power Pool for off-taking. In Zimbabwe, there's a deficit of over 1,000 megawatts, irrespective of the current crisis that we have. Zambia, I think it's over 600 megawatts and so forth. Another key aspect for Botswana is, I think the irradiation level was discussed, so I don't want to go into detail pertaining that, but Botswana is attractive from that perspective. The other component is, it has got a massive land size. France has got over 60 million population, but in terms of land size, it's actually similar with Botswana. So I think from our perspective, Botswana is well positioned to be the host of the biggest power plant that can serve the entire region. So from our perspective, those are the two opportunities: the intra opportunities within Botswana, and the strategic opportunities of positioning Botswana as the center for building power plants and feed the power through Southern Africa Power Pool due to its
Thank you very much.
Size and also bankability from attracting local finance. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ainus. If you can just stop sharing the screen at the top there, and it's very interesting to see all of that interconnection going on in the region. I think that it should definitely make things easier. And last but not least, Isaac, I'd like to invite you to please share your screen and give us your presentation. Ashwin has been replying away some of the questions that you've sent, so feel free to keep sending them. Isaac, could you start sharing your screen and getting everything ready? Perfect, yay. So keep sending them, otherwise we'll revisit some of this anyway later so that everybody finds out. If you can just unmute your microphone and then go for it. We cannot hear you at the moment. Can you just unmute your microphone? Isaac, can you unmute your microphone, please?
Now, can you hear me now?
Yes, now we can hear you.
It was not working. Okay, give me 1 second. Okay, thank you very much. After the presentation by Ashwin and by Ainus, it's quite difficult for me, to let's say, to keep new details to these opportunities in Namibia and Botswana. But I think that I can give you some details that can be quite good, okay, in terms of the development and the investment in Namibia and Botswana. First of all, let me make you a small introduction of Alten, okay? Later we will go to Namibia, okay? Namibia like an investor, as Ashwin has already mentioned, we have been awarded with a tender process of 37 megawatts in the country. And now the power plant is almost already constructed and will be entering into operation in the coming weeks. Then in Namibia, we'll be speaking about an investor, and in Botswana, a country in which we have been taking a look for 2 years, and I think that is quite interesting for us. We'll be speaking like a developer, like a developer starting our operations there. Okay, this is a small introduction of Alten. Alten was incorporated around 12 years ago, like an IPP, an independent power producer, only focused on solar PV plants. Okay, we have started our operations in Spain. As you probably know, in Spain there were a lot of problems related with policies, change of tariffs, and all these things. And finally, 5 years ago, we have decided to go overseas. Okay, to go overseas in countries in which solar PV can be competitive without subsidies. Okay, that is quite important to ensure the viability of the projects for the future. That's the reason because we have decided to go to 2 different regions, America, mostly Mexico, and Sub-Saharan Africa. Let's go to this small map of the world, and you will see which are our operations. Today, we have developed around 600 megawatts in Mexico. 350 megawatts will enter into operation in the coming week. I hope so. Let's cross fingers. And in Sub-Saharan Africa, we have focused our operations in 3 countries. Kenya, in which we have developed 2 projects of 40 megawatts. In Nigeria, in which we were working on a project of 100 megawatts, 120 megawatts. And in Namibia, where we have this project that we have been awarded, 37 megawatts, and we are developing also small projects. As you can see, we are working also in Botswana, Zambia, Mozambique, Senegal, Argentina, and Colombia. This is a small idea of what is Alten, okay? And I will go to the details, okay, to the most interesting part of the presentation. I have arranged this slide about Namibia, but after the good introduction of the country by Ashwin, I will only explain 3 topics of the country. First of all, this is a democratic country, since its independence, I think 27 years ago, Namibia has been governed by the SWAPO, okay, but SWAPO has won all the democratic elections by 70, 75, 83% of the total shares of the votes. And I think it's quite good if we can develop this kind of projects in democratic countries, but this will help us a lot in terms of corruptions, in terms of transparency, in terms of how to do in business. Second is the, let's say, the importance of the mining sector in Namibia. No? Namibia is the 6th largest uranium producer in the world and has probably the biggest uranium mine in the world. Okay, this is a Chinese mine located quite near of Arandis, and they will need in the near future a lot of electricity. The last point that I think is quite important to note is that in Namibia we have the Namibian dollar. The Namibian dollar is the currency of the country and is pegged to the South African rand. And today, thanks to the volatility that the rand is suffering, the government of Namibia is thinking on the possibility to deslist, to peg the currency to the South African rand. Okay, that's quite important in the future to keep this in mind for making investments in the country. In terms of the regulatory and electricity framework, okay, my teammates have explained quite well. I will give you only few notes. No? That the electricity utility is non-power, is fully controlled by the government. We have the ECB. The ECB is the regulatory authority that is responsible for the generation license, for controlling all the transmission, distribution. There is a clear framework for getting a generation license, for getting the extension of the generation license that is quite good. No? Then we have non-power, we have the regulatory authority, the ECB, and we have the regional distribution companies. This is a new figure that has appeared on the last years, and today we have 3 different regional distribution companies: Thenored, Erongo-Red, Nored, and suspected that this year Southern Red will become operational and will start managing the south of the country. Why these companies are important? No? These companies are important because they are going to start to manage the commercialization of the electricity and also the distribution of the country. You know? What does it mean at the end of the day? That the small projects that we are going to develop in the future probably will be negotiated with these small companies. Okay. Another important point is related with the electricity. Namibia, despite the growth, despite that Namibia can be considered a rich country in Africa, imports almost 60% of the electricity. 60% of electricity is a lot. Despite the entry into operation of the Hardap project, Hardap project is the project that I have mentioned that we are going to connect in the coming weeks, this 60% will be decreased at around 55–54%. There is a lot of room still for solar PV in the country. Okay, if we combine these imports with the dramatic increase of the consumer electricity prices, we have a very good mix for the solar PV in the future. No? In terms of the PV framework, I think that we have explained previously very well the refit program with 14 projects of 5 megawatts each one with a high tariff. Okay. These projects has been almost everyone connected into the grid, or if it's not connected, will be connected into the grid in the coming weeks. Okay, the tender process of the 37 megawatts that I will explain later. Okay, and there's also a stable framework for self-consumption. Okay, you can find in Windhoek, that is the capital of the country, a lot of small installations. Okay, thanks to this good framework that the government has established. No. Also, I'm mentioning the mining sector. There's I think, a very good opportunity. There has been some approaches to the mining companies by non-power, by independent power producer, and despite today is not mature, in the near future there will be a lot of projects there. In terms of the solar resources, I think that is something that we need to keep in mind. We are speaking about probably one of the countries with the highest level irradiation levels in the world. No? We can speak about Chile, we can speak about Peru, the Atacama Desert that is well known all around the world by the irradiation levels. But I think that Namibia is almost on the range. It's almost on the range of all these countries. No? Going to the project that I have mentioned, okay, this 37 megawatts project, I think the most important for all of us, okay, apart from the things that Alten has done in the project, is let's say, the financing, the structure, and the solar irradiation level. No? We're speaking that the lenders of the project were Standard Bank and Proparco. Okay, there was a huge interest in the market to finance this project. I can tell you that the experience with Standard Bank and Proparco, it has been quite impressive. We are impressed by their work, but also DG, FMO, or PIC, okay, were quite interested on financing this project. In terms of the structure, no, you can see that this is a PPP project, a private-public partnership project, in which NamPower has a stake of 19% of the company, the PDNs 30%, and Alten 51%. Let's say, what is PDNs? No, previously disadvantaged Namibians. Let's say that is comparable to the black empowerment that there is, for example, in South Africa. This requirement of previous disadvantaged Namibians only apply to SPVs. This is quite good in terms of the EPC contractors, in terms of the manufacturing, okay, because it lets this commitment to the sponsor to manage this commitment, okay, to get the PDNs on board. But in terms of the EPC, in terms of the materials, you have, let's say, all the freedom, okay, to engage the communities, to engage in the industry that you have there, okay, without a threshold, okay. That is, I think, is quite important to get solar PV competitive in the country. Going to the point of the conclusions, no, I think that there are small points, small things that I think that will be quite helpful, no, that we need to keep in mind. First of all, up to 60% of the electricity is imported from the countries surrounding Namibia. That is quite important, okay? The NamPower has a reliable and strong power network, okay? That's quite important in order to develop new projects of utility scale, small projects. That's quite important for the future. As I have mentioned previously, this is one of the countries with the highest solar irradiation levels in the world compared to Chile or Peru, for example. They have also a good experience with solar and its integration to the grid. We have spent a lot of, let's say, meetings with NamPower, discussing with them, and they have a lot of experience with solar, and I think that is quite helpful to understand the technology, to help the technology, okay, to growth in the country. There is also a local industry quite well developed. Okay, we can find solar specialists, solar companies, high voltage installators. They are used to work in solar PV. And also there is an important issue, okay, if you are willing to start the construction or the investment in Namibia, that they have one of the biggest seaports in Africa, that is Walvis Bay. Let's say that we are speaking about a quite mature country, okay, in terms of solar. There is an industry, the utility knows about the PPAs, about the technology, about a lot of things. Let's say that there's a clear framework, okay? Then which are the next steps, no? If I'm trying to go to Namibia, what are the things that I should think about? Probably we are speaking about, in the near future, power plants in the range of 5 to 15 megawatts, okay? Probably in the near future, there will be no big, let's say, utility scale projects of 45 or 50 or 100 megawatts in the future in Namibia. That's my personal opinion, okay? Probably it will be big, let's say, power plants if it's combined with storage, but this is another completely different issue, no? And according to NamPower, okay, and you can see it in their annual report, okay, what they are expecting in terms of the PPA. As Wim has mentioned, things that are quite important, okay? PPAs should be improved, okay, should be improved in terms of force majeure. I think that they should be improved in terms of the protection in determination prices that are quite important. But there are certain issues that when you are arriving to Namibia, you should keep in mind. First of all, you are not going to have a sovereign warranty. That should be very clear, no? NamPower has a BBB rating from Fitch, okay, and the government of Namibia is not willing to give any sovereign warranty. Second, they are expecting a very competitive tariff in the range of 4-6 US cents per kilowatt hour. Okay, it will be a strong effort combining with the lack of a sovereign warranty. And the last point, and probably a very important point, is that NamPower is not willing to take the risk currency exposure. What does it mean? That your PPA will be paid in Namibian dollars and you will not have, let's say, any warranty for the convertibility of the Namibian dollar. No, that's things that we need to keep in mind when we are going to Namibia, when we are trying to develop something in Namibia. And I think that are the ideas that we have been discussing with NamPower, with other IPPs in the last years. No? keeping Namibia out, let's go to Botswana. I think that Ainos has made a very good introduction, better than myself for sure. And only I want to give you in 4 tips. I have arranged this slide because I think it's quite important. First of all, Pula, it's probably one of the strongest currencies in Africa. This is something that is quite important in terms for the PPAs. Second, in terms of the corruption that Ainos has mentioned, let's say that Botswana is one of the less corrupted countries in the world. Okay, I have included this list from Transparency International, in which you can see that in the first, let's say in the first ranks, you will see the Scandinavian countries. You will see later some European countries, and among Portugal, Poland, you will see Botswana. That's quite good. You know, that's quite good for doing business. Third. Many times we speak about the Asian tigers, you know, about the growth of South Korea, about Taiwan, about Singapore. If you take a look on the GDP growth of Botswana in the last 30 years, you will see that they are the 3rd country in the world with the highest GDP growth. Okay, they are the 3rd. The first is China, the second is South Korea, and the 3rd is Botswana. And the last one, and probably the most important for us, no, is that there is a plan for development of the country, okay, that already has been mentioned, that will get a focus on the internet and telecommunications industry and also on the energy sector. That is quite important. No? These are the 4 ideas that I want from, let's say, from the macro overview from Botswana. In terms of the sector, okay, the electricity sector and the PV framework. As we have mentioned, we have Botswana Power Corporation, okay, that is fully owned by the government. In the coming months, the Botswana Energy Authority will come, let's say, operative, will be the regulator, but it's impressive that a country like Botswana today does not have a regulator in place. It will mean a lot for us because it will help us to create a market in Botswana. And also, like Namibia, despite they have these power plants, these Morupule B and Morupule A coal power plants that will enter fully into operation in the coming years, they have a lot of imports coming from the surrounding countries, okay? It's not clear the figure, according to the BPC last annual report, it's around 40%. It will mean a lot for a country that is, let's say, is quite intensive on the consumption of energy. In terms of the PV framework, I only want to add some few points, okay, that it has been a quite stable framework for the standalone installations that has allowed to develop these standalone installations, and that there are, let's say, new upgrades into the grid that are expected. Botswana Power Corporation is willing to upgrade the grid, the transmission grid, and the distribution grid, and this will help us a lot to develop solar projects in the country. Going to the conclusions, okay, and the points, let's say that this is one of the fewer new markets in the world, okay? You can see that there is not a lot of solar projects. There is a lot of interest for sure, but there are not a lot of solar PV projects. There is not today a clear framework, okay? The framework needs some development, and all the solar IPPs, we need to work to develop this solar framework. No? As I have mentioned, this 40% of imports coming from the region, this is a strong development of the grid that will help us a lot. Despite, compared with Namibia, the radiation is lower, but it's still quite high. It's still quite high compared with other countries. And I think that in terms of developing, let's say, the project there, I think that we can think in the following, let's say, 3 points. First of all, that if we are willing to develop a project in Botswana, it will take some time. It will take some time because we need to work with the utility in the grid code. We need to work on this new framework for renewables that will enter into operation in the coming years. What does it mean? That the first project will be able to get probably better tariffs, okay? Because there is no a clear tariff today for solar PV in Botswana. First, there is no clarity on sovereign warranty approach, okay? That's quite important. Today, we don't have a clarity on this sovereign guarantee, but the financial position of the BPC is not the best. And probably a sovereign guarantee for the first projects, for the first solar projects, will be needed. And latest, I think that my impression, and according to the discussions, that the BPC will not take risk currency exposure. At the end of the day, we are going to be paid with the Botswana currency, with the Pula, and we are not going to be payable with Namibian dollars and euros. That's the idea. No? I think that Botswana is a quite good market for the future. There is a huge interest in the market for Botswana, but we need to take into consideration these recommendations. And that's all. Thank you very much, and I hope that this has been helpful for all of you.
Thank you very much, Isaac. It has been really helpful, and I've also found incredible how you've built on, what Ines and Ashwin had said as well, considering that you were the third person to present, and there is always a little bit of repetition, but I think it's important that those messages also come home. Mm-hmm. So you are the developer here. So I wanted to ask you a question that maybe you can't answer, but I think let's put it out there. When I was in a conference with the guys at Aqua, we asked a very generic question to Paddy, the CEO, and we asked, what would be one of the best markets in your opinion, to develop CSP plants in this case? And he said, actually, he thought that Botswana and Namibia could get the lowest tariffs in the world, or some of the lowest tariff. So my question to you is, do you think this market can be truly competitive, as in considering the prices that we're seeing right now around the world, considering the high radiations and a little bit more help maybe from the government, in terms of propping up the industry? How competitive could you be in Namibia and Botswana? That's kind of the question. Maybe if you can give us a figure, then you'll make me really happy.
No, it's quite difficult to give let's say, a tariff, because it depends a lot of things, we have mentioned previously, all the speakers, we have mentioned the cost of capital. Okay, the cost of capital in these countries is, let's say, quite high. That's the problem that we have here. We are speaking about Namibian dollar. We are not able to find any hedge structure in the market for Namibian dollar. Okay, and we should go through rand structures, With this problem, this future strategy of possible depeg of Namibian dollar and rand, make it complex, okay, make it more complex. In terms of the Pula, it is what it is. We are not going to have any, let's say, indexation or something like that. I have previously mentioned in the presentation, I think that in terms of Namibia, getting tariffs of 4 cents, 4.5, 6 cents, okay, it's feasible. It's feasible, but thinking on the following, okay? We need to change the PPA. Today, there is a lot of issues related with determination payments and the force majeure events. That is quite important, okay? At the end of the day, if you have termination by the government and you will not recover your investment, is quite difficult, okay, to offer a quite competitive tariff, That's first. We need to for reaching this level of prices, we need to take a look to the PPAs, okay, first. Second, we need to get, let's say, very good interconnection points, okay, because at the end of the day, if we are willing to get such level of tariffs, we should go to 132 kilovolts, 66 kilovolts will be feasible but difficult. We need to get very good interconnection points, okay, and I think in terms of the land, we need to let's say, be flexible, The government of Namibia should be flexible. Keeping that in mind, okay, that's quite important. I think that in the range of 4 to 6 cents, it will be feasible in Namibia. In terms of Botswana, I think my personal opinion is that it's too soon to speak about this level of prices, okay? Because first of all, there is a need to create a framework. Without a framework, it's quite difficult. There will be a lot of IPPs. Probably, in this case, Enos has spent a lot of resources to develop projects in the country, and probably he has a lot of sunk cost or not, okay? But probably reaching that level of prices in the near future will be difficult. But prices probably of 6, 7, 8 cents in the near future in Botswana will be feasible. Always keeping in mind that we are speaking about utility scale projects of 30, 35 megawatts.
Thank you very much, Isaac. So we don't have a lot of time actually, but Ashwin, you had a couple of questions that you wanted to answer You marked them. So why don't you answer them for us?
Sure. I mean, the one question which was posed related to support or regulations for the off-grid market to unlock that in Botswana and Namibia. So I think dealing with Namibia first, I think there's clearly more of a drive for off-grid development in Namibia, given their kind of disparity between rural and urban environments. I think the same is not the case in Botswana. So there's probably less drive in Botswana to kind of shift those levels of electrification. However, if I think about Namibia, one probably needs things like some tax relief, some relief on import duties. Those kinds of mechanisms, I think, would support the development of off-grid in that market. I don't necessarily think any regulation is necessarily required, but I think if government supports off-grid or off-grid investors or say suppliers in that way, that will definitely result in the cost to the ultimate user being a lot less. The second question which was flagged related to NamPower and their participation in the project that Isaac mentions. And I'll have an answer, but I'm sure Isaac would like to provide an alternative view as well. So, I mean, the question was whether NamPower, being a shareholder in the project, mitigates some of the project risk, or does it increase the cost, and was their shareholding a free carry? So I think, you know, they were fairly specific about their shareholding not being a free carry, and it's in fact a value that they've added to the project. So I think, you know, that was a fair statement by NamPower, and of course Isaac can disagree, but they did provide land which was permitted and licensed, and so they did add some value. And I imagine that, you know, Alton went through a process to value what had been contributed and therefore determine what that shareholding should be. Whether or not it's a mitigating factor, I think as a 19% shareholder, you know, they probably are adding some value in terms of mitigation risk, and are probably not kind of negatively influencing the project or creating a cost drag on the project. I think if they had been a bigger shareholder, let's say 25 or 30%, so significant minority interest, I think that would have become a bit of a hurdle given the conflicts of interest, etc. But I think at sort of less than 20%, it's probably a value add. Personal opinion. But Isaac, please comment.
Yes, no, I think that
I was going to say comment and then Aino's comments, and then we'll have to close.
Yes,
Yeah,
very quickly, I think that Aswin has described pretty well, okay, that NamPower has added value, okay, with the land, with the interconnection, because they have been responsible for the interconnection of the power plant, and they have been also responsible for managing the environmental issues, okay, before starting the construction. They have added value for sure. And in terms of the risk during, let's say, our management, our discussions, everything, I think that with NamPower we have learned a lot. Okay, we have learned a lot. They have explained a lot of things about how to proceed, how to manage projects in Namibia, and I think that it has been a very good experience. Risk mitigations, probably, and I agree on that point, because we have NamPower as buyer of the electricity, NamPower as shareholder with different teams, and when we have started to do something probably not the best approach for that, our shareholder has started, please do not do like this, try to change these strategies and let's follow this process. No, it has been quite valuable, let's say the approach and the different quotes from NamPower.
Yeah. From my side, I think on the question of promoting microgrids in Botswana, I think the most important aspect we are lobbying for and we need to see is the smart metering, so that there's a communication and invoicing, even at retail level, between the national utility and some of the microgrid owners. But on the tariff component for Botswana, we think the first 3 projects might get slightly competitive tariff rates, which might be, in our estimate, maybe around 9 cents. But thereafter, we think Botswana will be in a position to be, in the same league with Zambia and Namibia in terms of tariff competitiveness. That's all.
Thank you very much to all of you. Thank you very much, Isaac. Thank you very much, Ines, and thank you very much, Ashwin. It's been great learning from you today, and thank you very much, everyone also in the audience. We're holding other topics as well. We have Nigeria, Senegal. If you're interested in those, sign up. And just without further ado, I just like to say thank you all and see you next time. Bye. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.